Have you ever felt invisible, as if, no matter how hard you tried, the world simply couldn't see your pain? Well, that's exactly what happened to Isabella Santos, a maid who, between buckets and rags, hid her tears and a secret that no one would ever imagine. One morning, while cleaning the floor of a luxurious mansion, she fell. But it wasn't just her body that collapsed, it was her soul. What seemed like just another ordinary day turned into the trigger for an emotional upheaval so intense that not even a soap opera would dare to dramatize it like that. Millionaire Artur Montenegro, who until then had lived a life of appearances and comfort, found himself facing an abyss. The woman he had discarded years ago was now before him, destroyed, with her heart in ruins, and with a son he never knew he had. The scene was worthy of a movie: tears on marble, an innocent child, and a past that came back like an avalanche. But what do you do when the past knocks on your door with the force of the present, and when that past has green eyes identical to yours? This isn't just a story about love and regret. It's about broken trust, social inequality, and the value of a second chance. And yes, even a simple ice cream can become a symbol of affection and redemption. Get ready to dive into a story that makes you think, feel, and maybe even forgive. Because when love is real, it can withstand even 7 years of silence. Isabella Santos's life had never been a bed of roses. But that day, the floor of the mansion where she worked seemed colder than ever. The same house where she scrubbed shiny floors was, ironically, the setting for a past she struggled to forget. In the eyes of others, she was just another maid. But there, inside that uniform, was a woman trying to hold the pieces of herself together while the world insisted on falling apart. And it wasn't just the weight of the bucket that tired her. It was the weight of the history she carried. At 28, Isabella had already experienced more loss than many people experience in a lifetime. 7 years ago, she left Montenegro Construções with a broken heart and a crumbling dignity. Since then, she has carried the responsibility of raising Miguel, her son who was born out of abandonment, alone. She cleaned, cooked, and did the impossible with the little she earned, without ever complaining. But inside, she was a whirlwind, an emptiness that not even her son's smile could completely fill. The work was hard, yes, but nothing compared to the pain of having been forgotten. The curious thing is that even amidst so much pain, Isabella kept going. She didn't want pity. She wanted respect. She wanted dignity. She just wanted a chance to breathe without feeling that at any moment someone could crush her again. She clung to her faith and love for Miguel like someone clinging to a plank in the middle of a shipwreck. And there she was, cleaning the Montenegro family's house, the same one that had erased her name from the past, until fate, with its refined irony, decided to bring her back to the eye of the hurricane. Isabella Santos didn't just see with her eyes. She saw with her soul. That's why it hurt so much to see the world around her begin to disappear into dark spots that slowly spread like hungry shadows. The diagnosis was a punch in the stomach: macular degeneration, 3,000 reais per injection, 1 per month, forever. It was like hearing a blindness sentence signed with cold bureaucratic rigor. How could she pay for that by cleaning houses for minimum wage? She had to choose between seeing or feeding her child, but she tried. She sought out the SUS, faced seemingly endless lines, spent hours in cold hallways, waiting for a miracle that never came. Each come back in 6 months was like a new stab wound. And even so, Isabella kept going, pretending to see properly, feeling the ground to keep from falling. The loss of her vision was not just physical, it was symbolic. She was losing control of her own life, of her small freedoms, of her ability to protect Miguel without depending on anyone. Keeping this secret was an act of survival. She couldn't let anyone know, especially Artur Montenegro. If that man discovered her vulnerability, he could use it against her. He could try to take Miguel, and she would never allow that. That's why, even with her eyes failing, she kept her head held high, because losing her sight was terrifying, but losing her son, that would be the end. And she was willing to hide her pain as long as she could, as long as her body and heart could bear it. Artur Montenegro was the typical millionaire raised in comfort, surrounded by luxury and vanity. Until that moment, he believed he had everything under control: career, fame, women. But all he had to do was look at Isabella Santos, kneeling on the floor, with tears in her eyes and her dignity in pieces, for his world to turn upside down. There was something about that scene that disconcerted him. And it was there, on that floor wet with bleach and old tears, that he saw Miguel for the first time, a 6-year-old boy with the same green eyes he saw in the mirror. The shock was immediate. Artur didn't know he had a son. The memory of that night with Isabella 7 years earlier came back like a slow-motion movie, a night he had tried to forget, burying it with excuses of not fooling himself, as if she were just a waitress and he was a man with responsibilities. But now, in front of Miguel, the past was taking its toll. The boy didn't know who he was, but he smiled with an innocence that crumbled the most solid defenses. And in that smile, Artur saw more than a resemblance. He saw a lost chance to be someone better. The discovery of his paternity came like an avalanche. Artur felt the ground disappear, the air run out, time stop. It wasn't a question. It was a certainty, written all over the boy's features. Miguel was his son. And with that came guilt, regret and fear, because knowing that you lost 6 years of a child's life out of pure ignorance is a weight that cannot be carried lightly. From that moment on, Artur knew. He wanted to be there. He wanted to know his son. But regaining that right would not be an easy task. Isabella Santos's reaction was no surprise. It was a storm. When Artur Montenegro finally tried to explain himself, she listened, but with a shielded heart. 7 years of silence cannot be erased with a conversation. 7 years of abandonment cannot be cured with "forgive me," and he realized this right from the first attempt. Isabella was firm, determined, almost cold. For her, that man had already failed, not only as a partner, but as a human being. And now he wanted to play at being a father. The argument was heavy. Each word spoken carried years of unresolved pain. She threw in his face everything she had kept silent for so long: the contempt, the humiliation, the indifference. She said he had chosen reputation over love, that he had treated her as disposable. And now, just because he found out that Miguel existed, he wanted to take up space. Arthur, swallowing his guilt, tried to defend himself, but each argument was swallowed up by a past that screamed louder. Isabella was not ready to listen, much less to forgive, and it wasn't just about her. It was about Miguel, about the fear of seeing him create bonds and then be abandoned like his mother was. She didn't want her son to go through what she went through, and no matter how much Arthur said he had changed, that he wanted to take on the role of father, Isabella was unmoved, because when trust is broken, wanting it isn't enough. You have to rebuild it, and rebuilding, my friend, takes time, proof, presence, and a lot of patience. What Arthur didn't know yet was that the road back would require much more than pretty words. Donna Rosa has always been Isabella Santos's rock. When the world turned its back, she was the one who reached out. And in this story full of scars, the figure of the protective mother shone with a serene strength. When Isabella arrived home devastated, it was Donna Rosa who put the beans on the fire and her daughter's heart in her lap. With the experienced eyes of someone who has lived through a lot, she didn't judge, she just listened. Because I knew that sometimes the best advice is the silence you welcome. She understood like no one else the weight of being a woman, a single mother, and a maid. She had raised Isabella alone, with little money and a lot of determination. That's why when she heard the name Artur Montenegro, her soul trembled. She knew how much he had hurt her daughter. And yet, between tears and anger, she found room for empathy. Daughter, every boy needs a father. she said carefully. She wasn't defending Artur. She was concerned about Miguel, because she saw her grandson growing up with unanswered questions, unfulfilled dreams. Even with her fierce instinct to protect her daughter, Donna Rosa knew that a grandmother's love is no substitute for a father figure. And so, she planted a doubt in Isabella's mind. What if he changed? The question came not with demands, but with tenderness, an invitation to think, to possibilities. Donna Rosa didn't want to convince, she wanted to help her reflect, because a real mother doesn't impose choices, but rather illuminates paths. And there, in that simple kitchen, she began to prepare the ground for what could, perhaps, be the beginning of a reconciliation. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. Isabella Santos knew that in order to protect the little emotional stability she had left, she would have to quit her job. Working at Arthur Montenegro's mother's house, after all, was like reliving an open wound every day. Every room in that mansion was a reminder of what she had lost, of the contempt she had suffered, of the life she had had to rebuild alone. It was more than discomfort. It was unbearable. The dismissal came without warning, without a farewell. Just a dry, short, objective phone call. She didn't even want to look back. She knew that her attitude would seem irresponsible in the eyes of her bosses, but what did they know about pain? For someone who earns minimum wage, dignity comes at a high price, and Isabella, at that moment, was willing to pay. It was a message to herself. I don't need to subject myself anymore. No matter how much they paid, no matter the job security, what mattered now was Miguel. Of course, fear struck. Donna Rosa questioned it. The rent made a difference at the end of the month, especially with $3,000 per injection up front. But for Isabella, it was more dangerous to stay there. She knew how Arthur's presence shook Miguel, awakened hope, and opened emotional gaps. And she couldn't allow her son to be the next to be discarded. It was better to be in need than to see her little one with a broken heart. Isabella decided not to wait for the disaster. She chose to leave before it was too late. Artur Montenegro was not a man to run after something, but this time it was different. For the first time he felt he needed to prove something, not to others, but to himself. He went to Isabella's house, in the heart of Villa Esperanza, with his soul exposed and a request on his lips. The person who answered him was Donna Rosa, with a sharp gaze and a vivid memory. She didn't let him pass. The door was his first barrier. But Artur, although clumsy, was determined. He wanted to be a father. He wanted to fix what had broken. The conversation with Donna Rosa was tense. She was a wall made of love and distrust. When he asked for 5 minutes, she answered with a no that weighed more than 1,000 arguments. But there was something in his eyes, something that was not arrogance, nor his usual charm. It was pain. It was truth. And like the good mother that she is, Donna Rosa noticed. She asked him to wait, went in, and talked to Isabella. The discussion inside was heartbreaking. Protection versus redemption, instinct versus second chance. The answer was negative, once again. But this time, Arthur accepted it in silence, with his head down and his heart broken. He didn't make a fuss, he didn't shout, he just left his number in case she changed her mind one day. And he left, without knowing that right there, on that balcony, the seed of personal transformation had begun. Because recognizing your mistake is halfway to becoming a better person. And maybe, just maybe, Isabella had noticed that too. Who would have thought that ice cream could do so much? But it was there, in that small neighborhood ice cream shop, that Arthur Montenegro achieved what no grandiose speech could have achieved: Miguel's trust. The boy, with eyes shining with joy and a mouth stained with chocolate, spoke to Arthur as if they were old friends. He showed him his new sneakers, told stories about school, and talked about the drawings he made, including the one of his imaginary father. And Arthur, listening to each word, felt his heart break and then rebuild itself in seconds. Isabella, on the other hand, watched everything with attentive eyes. Seeing her son happy and feeling special was a gift, but along with the tenderness came fear. The fear that the bond would grow, only to be cut once again. When Miguel asked for the ice cream and Arthur offered to pay, she hesitated. It was a simple, almost silly gesture, but full of meaning. She knew she was facing a decisive moment, and that day, for the first time, she let herself give in. "Just this once," she said. While Miguel covered himself in chocolate, Arthur discovered that fatherhood wasn't about biology or status. It was about presence. It was about listening, playing, sharing silences. And curiously, it was the boy who taught him this. There was no lecture, no pressure. There was just a simple invitation. "Do you want to be my friend?" The most disarming question in the world, and the answer, said with absolute sincerity, began what could be the reconstruction of a story, this time with true affection. Isabella Santos knew that moment would come, the moment when there would be no more hiding the truth. While Miguel played along, she and Artur Montenegro moved away from the ice cream shop table to talk. The mood was tense, but there was also a timid hope in the air. Artur opened his heart. He spoke of how much he regretted it, of the fear he felt of having lost the chance to be someone better. But it was when he mentioned something that few would notice, the way she blinks, the way she feels the ground, that she understood. He saw what no one else could see. Unable to hide it any longer, Isabella dropped the bombshell. She was going blind, macular degeneration, 3,000 reais per injection, and she, alone, with a maid's salary, simply couldn't afford it. The confession came choked with tears, but not with pity. She didn't want handouts. She wanted dignity. She wanted to continue being a mother, active, present, capable. But the disease was winning, devouring her vision and her chances of maintaining control over her own life. Arthur's response was immediate. Without hesitation, he promised to pay for everything, all the injections, every month, as long as it was necessary, not out of obligation, but out of love, because he still loved her, because he loved Miguel, because now he could clearly see what he had in his hands, and he didn't want to lose it anymore. Isabella, in disbelief, listened to everything with her heart in her hand. After all, hearing promises was nothing new. But seeing the man who hurt her kneel down emotionally and ask for a chance to take care of her, that was new and frighteningly real. After so much pain, it's hard to believe that love can be reborn. But sometimes it appears in disguise, in a shared ice cream, in a sincere look, in a quiet gesture. Isabella Santos spent nights awake thinking, was it worth taking another risk? She was afraid. Afraid of opening her heart and being disappointed, of giving her son a father and then watching him leave. But every time she saw Miguel smile next to Arthur, something inside her softened, and that something had a name: hope. Artur Montenegro's personal transformation was visible. It wasn't just talk. He spent nights arranging reports, consultations, and health insurance. He played with Miguel as if he were playing with his own destiny, trying to rewrite the past through the present. And even Donna Rosa, who had been rigid before, began to see in him a different man, someone who finally understood the value of the word family. He was no longer just the distant millionaire. Now he was the father who stacked puzzle pieces and washed dishes with his child. Isabella finally began to allow it. A little bit each day. She let Arthur pay for the first injection. Then she let him take Miguel to school. The fear didn't go away, but it got less. Because sometimes love needs to be relearned. You need to be tested in practice. And there, in that simple house in Villa Esperanza, a new story was born. Not perfect, but real, made of forgiveness, of presence, of mistakes that become bridges. Because, in the end, maybe loving again is the greatest act of courage. What if it were you? If someone from your past who hurt you deeply came back and said they had changed? Would you believe them? Or would you protect your heart like someone protecting a ruined castle? The story of Isabella Santos and Artur Montenegro is not just a tale of love and forgiveness. It is an invitation for us to look at our own relationships with more courage. After all, how many times do we close doors for fear of reopening wounds, without realizing that some of these doors can lead to healing? Are you giving those who deserve it a chance to prove that they have changed? Or are you hiding behind armor made of old hurts? And is your Arthur side the one who has made a big mistake trying to redeem himself, or is he still running away? Stories like this remind us that loving, forgiving, and starting over are not signs of weakness, but of an emotional strength that is rare in today's times. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because here, each story is a chance to get to know yourself better and maybe change your own narrative.